Okay, great. Hello and welcome to the fourth live panel discussion of this 24-hour marathon event celebrating the impact of forest landscape restoration across the globe. I'm your host and moderator for this panel. My name's Chris Buss and I'm the director of the IUCN Forest Conservation Programme, and happy to be moderating this session titled The UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration and the role that the Bond Challenge will play in this decade. As we've heard in the three previous discussions, the Bond Challenge is the world's largest restoration initiative to date, with the goal of bringing 350 million hectares into restoration by 2030 and upwards of 20 million hectares already pledged. The seed for the UN Decade of Ecosystem Restoration was sown at a ministerial dialogue on the Bond Challenge, where representatives from the El Salvador government encouraged delegates to scale up lessons and experiences from implementing the Bond Challenge into a global call for restoration across all ecosystems. And within a year, we had 80 governments in the UN General Assembly had endorsed the UN Decade, and it comes into force in 2021. Forest landscape restoration, the approach that underpins the Bond Challenge, is the first purpose-built nature-based solution with compelling proof of concept and will play a key role in helping deliver the UN Decade of ecosystem restoration. Joining me, I have a wonderful panel with Lena Paul, representative of the UN FAO based in Mexico, who was actually the former environment minister for El Salvador and secured the UN support for the decade. We have Malik Amin Aslam, the federal minister and advisor to the Prime Minister of Pakistan for climate change, Salvador Nito, the executive secretary for the Central American Council of Ministers, and my colleague Adriana Vidal, the senior forest policy officer and IUCN's decade coordinator. So I look forward and thank you look forward to the discussions with this panel, and thank you for all joining. So I'm going to jump straight into some questions and start with Lena. Lena, you were central to the drive behind the Decade of Restoration, and saw the decade move from being an idea from a small group of countries and organizations to a global UN proclamation. So fantastic a drive to get the UN Decade of Restoration, the drive behind the UN Decade of Restoration. But when it begins, we need to actually get down to the ground, drive back into the countries and the regions to be effective. So Lena, how does FAO see the decade advancing restoration in the region?
Oh, well, thank you, Chris. I'm very happy to be here to celebrate this day. I don't know, the decade is coming. So actually, FAO co-lead with the UNEP, and we are going to provide, for us, it's important because we are going to provide a vehicle to accelerate action aims at restoring the world ecosystems and sustainably providing goods and service from natural resources. For FAO, it is time to move toward positive nature-based solution. The FAO Director General noted in several speeches that science-based policy, new business models, and modern technology are key elements in achieving the food system transformation and ensuring food security. We need to transform food and agriculture systems so that they are more climate smart, resilient, and biodiversity friendly. Looking forward, now more than ever, these solutions, especially because of the COVID-19, these solutions that had to be nature and science-based. The center of the rebuild better, the back build better, the transformation that we need post-COVID-19. For example, in FAO, we have a new platform, an open data geospatial platform that integrates data sets provided by the FAO, but a large number of UN organizations and public and private external partners. And there are various FAO initiatives that help deepen understanding on biodiversity importance for our food, for livelihoods and environment, and highlights agriculture's role as a positive force for nature. Managing natural resources sustainable will be critical for preventing future pandemics, and FAO will continue to work with other UN agency and specialized agency in One Health approach, which recognize the connection between humans, animal, plants, and their shared environments, and applies integrated actions to reduce disease, pests, threats, and ensure safe food supply. So for us, it's a very important issue. We are going to work with every partner, with every government to implement the decade on ecosystem restoration. And we need to do that, especially now, more than ever.
Great, thanks, Lena, and wonderful to hear about the accelerating of action and drive forward.
Exactly.
And also hear you talking about some of the transformational shifts that are needed to happen. And Malik, as the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province in Pakistan was one of the first jurisdictions to fulfill its Bond Challenge pledge, you've now been instrumental in taking this ambition to the national level. So it'd be really interesting to hear from you, building on from what Lena said about what transformational shifts do you think that really need to happen to ensure restoration is successful and long-lasting?
Thanks a lot, Chris. And I would like to, first of all, thank IUCN for hosting this platform and also for the Bond Challenge. I think this has been really a transformational instrument at the global level. I have had the opportunity of not only being engaged with the Bond Challenge at an operational level, but also at the climate negotiation, in the climate negotiation process for the last more than a decade. And I think the kind of negotiation paralysis that we are seeing at the climate negotiation level is something that is really compensated by this action-based platform of the Bond Challenge. This is a voluntary pledge-based platform, but what it does is it really inspires action on the ground. And that is what my own experience has been of getting it off the ground in one of the provinces. Pakistan's experience with the Bond Challenge started way back in 2014, when our present political party was in government in the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province. And at that time, we were doing a plantation drive called the Billion Trees Tsunami. But what we were looking for was a global linkage. Now, we could not do it at a national level because we were not in government at the national level. So we pushed for the subnational entity to be registered under the Bond Challenge. And I think it was one of the first few entities that did get registered. But that created a very strong engine for change and for behavior change within the government and the policy makers. The Bond Challenge was with us as we moved through the Billion Tree project, which got completed in 2017 after 3 years. We met our Bond Challenge pledge and in fact surpassed it. So we had taken a pledge of about 0.38 million hectares of forest restoration. And we ended, when the government ended, at about 0.6 million, so almost double what we had pledged under the Bond Challenge. But it was the momentum that was created through this process that was extremely helpful. And then, the same party which I represented in the province is now in the federal government. So we continued with that momentum. And now, instead of the 1 billion project, now we have a 10 billion tree project going on in Pakistan right now. And we are in the process of registering a much higher pledge with the Bond Challenge, and it will be done very soon. I can say with certainty that it would not be less than 1 million hectares of forest restoration. Now, all this experience has taught us some very important lessons. Number one, that it is not just about planting of trees and restoring the forest. It's about creating an economy which creates jobs, which creates political dividends, and which creates a new way of thinking. And that is what the Bond Challenge really represents for the world. What it also does, number two, is that it allows action on the ground to be recognized and to be celebrated. Now we all get stuck in the negotiation process of the climate change negotiations, and when we wear that hat, we forget about a lot of good things which are happening in the world, and this is one of them. With the voluntary based process, it allows you to recognize and celebrate the success what we're doing right now. And I think that's extremely important to inspire and push countries towards positive action. So that's the second thing. And I think other than that, it provides a global linkage for local action. I did not realize the importance of that until we started doing this in this small province in the north of Pakistan. It was a war-torn province, which was just coming out of the terror war. And when we got registered in the Bond Challenge, and when I used to go to these small villages where people were planting trees, they would feel proud about that this is something that we're doing in this small village, but which is being recognized at the global level through the Bond Challenge. So that linkage was extremely important for the people to start owning the change in behavior. And I think that brings me to the last point, which is that the communities who live in these forests, who thrive in these forests, are absolutely essential to take on board. And this process of recognition at the global level allows us to do that. It allows policymakers to link up the community action with the global voluntary pledge, but it allows recognition to happen, which is extremely important for for further inspiring action. So overall, I think that this has been a big success story on the climate canvas, and I really look forward to the decade on ecosystem restoration. Pakistan has already announced what we call the Ecosystem Restoration Fund. That fund is basically, it was announced in Madrid at the COP meeting, but it's a fund which is focused on getting partners on board to help us in this process of nature-based solutions. And the Bond Challenge and forest and landscape restoration is a central pillar for ecosystem restoration. So I think we are looking forward to this. And I just would like to say as a last point that we get worried about where the funds are going to be generated for this. And in my own experience and in Pakistan's experience, the funds are there. I mean, if you have the right idea, you can create the right instruments. Funds is not the problem. We managed to generate about $120 million during the COVID era for forest restoration, because we linked it with jobs, with people who were locked down to go out in the open, plant trees, protect nurseries, protect the forest from fires. And that created about 84,000 jobs for Pakistan in the COVID era. So there is always an opportunity in a crisis. And I think as we get out of the COVID crisis, this is the opportunity the world needs to take care of. And I congratulate IUCN for taking the lead on this and for taking this process forward.
Great, thanks, Malik. Certainly, Pakistan is inspiring action. I think you gave a really interesting background to that, the global to local linkages, but also I loved your comment that the funds are there. Too often we hide behind the fact that we need resourcing, but we can find some for this positive nature-based solution and delivering restoration. So thank you very much. But it was also interesting hearing you talk at one at the global level, but one at the local level. And Salvador, the decade was promoted under the leadership of El Salvador. And very early on, the countries under the Central American Integration System and Central American Council of Ministers, came on board and were supporting the UN Decade of Restoration. So how do you see at a regional level this process, the process is shaping the vision on restoration in response to the objectives of the decade?
Thank you, Chris. Pleased to be here with my distinguished colleagues and of course with you. I think there was a solid foundation in the region to support the decade. In the context of their Bond Challenge pledges, several countries in Central America have developed strategies and restoration plans at national or subnational level with the support of IUCN, GIZ, and other agencies. The Central American Commission for Environment and Development, or CCAD, through its technical committees and the regional integration system at large scale, has mainstreamed a forest landscape restoration in the last years. I want to say an example of regional and intersectoral vision. Is the regional initiative to build resilience that promotes a synergistic approach between mitigation and adaptation in agriculture, forestry, and other land uses, called AFOLU 2040, in short, because the name is large, no? That initiative was approved at the end of 2019, and as an umbrella, the initiative supports existing landscape and ecosystem restoration and regional strategies. What is our landscape restoration approach? We have been integrating this approach into several transboundary initiatives with global importance for biodiversity and carbon pools, such as the Selva Maya Forest and the Fonseca Gulf, the Golfo de Fonseca. Also, several and regional initiatives funded by public investments and international cooperation are increasingly incorporating the landscape approach and therefore adopting nature-based solutions on a larger scale. As a contribution of a region to the global objectives of the decade, CCAD promotes technical and financial cooperation regarding national restoration strategies, monitoring restoration with the restoration barometer, for instance, the one that was developed by IUCN, which is critical to make decisions related to investment and regulatory frameworks, and the financial mechanisms and incentives through public and private partnerships. And finally, I think that to achieve decade's objectives, we need to continue and increase working together with support of organizations such as IUCN, GIZ, FAO, all the United Nations agencies, the international and multilateral cooperation, such as BMU and the European Union, that has been very important for us in the region, among others. And the last one in this topic will be that we need to increase the attraction for private investments, and seeking higher engagement of the civil society is key to accelerate actions in the field. Thanks.
Thanks, Salvador, and thanks for reinforcing the perspective from your region on the synergies across the different sectors of agriculture, forest, and other land uses, which is critical to delivering our restoration targets and making sure we work with all stakeholders across all different land uses and across the different biomes. Adriana, I've move across to you, and I'm working for IUCN. IUCN was one of the co-architects of the Bond Challenge and is a key player in the UN decade. So what lessons can be learned from the Bond Challenge experience that can enrich the decade implementation?
Thank you, Chris. Indeed, the Bond Challenge is an excellent reference for the implementation of the decade. And I want to highlight a couple of things. In the last 10 years, we witnessed that building a political agenda on FLR started with the spark of a leader, but this needed to be consolidated and backed up by multi-sectoral buy-in. This buy-in was built in part by making the case based on evidence that forest landscape restoration is a critical vehicle for the environmental and development agendas and for economic growth. Evidence about the benefits of restoration has been generated in dozens of countries, for instance, by the application of Rome and with the support of IUCN. The message is that consolidating political will and engagement supported by evidence is a critical element that the decade could build upon. The scientific underpinning for the decade can look into existing principles used for the implementation of the Bond Challenge pledges, which includes the forest landscape restoration principles and IUCN's nature-based solutions standard. Second, the decade should seek to build solid networks that are linked and aligned towards action. Looking at the Bond Challenge experience, it took leadership to make the pledges and to see them becoming on-the-ground implementation required a collaborative process of a network of actors. Although country-led, many actors from cooperation, technology and knowledge, science, finance, local communities, and indigenous peoples aligned into a common line of effort. In many cases, these aligned forces fill the gaps in information and capacity, helping materialize investment decisions from the government and the private sector towards restoration. This network of actors must rise to the challenge of the decade. What is needed most is action that is collaborative, cooperative, synergistic, and prioritized across agendas.
Fantastic. Thanks, Adriana. I think I love your point on the benefits and the evidence of those benefits, and perhaps it's stimulated discussion with Malik on his point about creating an economy and the jobs that has been created in Pakistan and how we think about it, not just as tree planting, but the economic benefits behind these restoration activities. Lena, I'm just going to come back to you with another question, because I saw you nodding furiously when Malik talked about the funding and the funding issues, and so I was just wondering where do you see the strongest opportunities to catalyze and leverage public funding for restoration in developing countries, so we can help deliver the objectives of the decade?
Yeah, actually, we need to have a lot of Maliks around the world. But beside of that, I mean, the scale of investment in ecosystem restoration required for a substantial global impact is likely and exceed, I mean, $1 trillion in total. And let's be honest, with the economic recession caused by the pandemic and the additional pressure on forestry and ecosystem, is not going to be easy. I think $1 trillion is not too much for restore the planet, but 3 things need to be done. First, we need to demonstrate that if we restore, conserve, and manage appropriately, sustainable, they can help create jobs and livelihoods and conserve biodiversity and mitigate climate change, and also help us to a more resilient environment to adapt to all the challenge, natural and biostress challenges. Second, we need to demonstrate to all sectors in the society, not only the public sector, but all sectors, especially the private sector, that restoring ecosystems is not a philanthropic activity or charity, but on the contrary, it makes an economic sector highly competitive, highly productive. And third, we all have a role to play during the decade. We need to ensure that everybody is on board. I mean, it is a change on the way we produce, obviously, but it's also a change in the way we consume. It requires a transformational change, a change in how we use our natural resources and take care of them. Making awareness campaigns on what this resource means to all of us and how it affects our living condition to make the sustainable decision. The decade will allow the monitoring of the progress made during its implementation, as well as the achievement of milestone at the national, as Malik said, and a regional, as Salvador said, and international level. So it will also support mainstreaming ecosystem restoration in policy, in plans, in the implementation of activity. And it is not possible just talk. I mean, you have to think, You have to think and you have to act to make of restoration a successful event. However, it has been a lot to everybody to discuss about the restoration programs, to know about the successful stories and those that have failed also. It's very important. But in my experience, to implement a restoration program, you must think first to establish a general action framework, define the instruments, regulation, and incentive. You need to develop a program based on information with a very high resolution, important at farm, local level, about the sites to be restored, about the techniques that you should use, the actor that should be involved, and the inputs that should be used to build monitoring systems that allows everybody to define if you are on the right track or the change that must to be done. And there are a lot of help. This is very important to say. IUCA has played a central role, the World Bank, the World Resource Institute, friendly countries such as Germany, Norway, European Union, the United Nations system also. Spaces like a Global Landscape Forum, the Bond Challenge, and other financial mechanisms. You should hear very well the new CEO of the Global Environmental Facility talking about this, and the GCF, the Adaptation Fund. I mean, we are a community. We need to act like a community with the same vision and with a lot of ambition also.
Great, thanks, Lena, and thanks for your passion and making sure that we are thinking and we are acting and driving this forward. So just conscious of the time, and Malik and Salvador, is that we do have a question that's come through from from the social media from Sindhu. So perhaps I can come back to both of you to respond to this question, because I think it does relate to how we think and act, and how we think and act at the local level. And Sindhu asked the question is, how will the agencies working on the decade ensure that it promotes the right kind of restoration with the involvement of the people most effective, particularly rural communities? So Malik, perhaps you can respond to that from your experience in Pakistan.
I think that's a really essential question. And I think this is again one of the areas in which Bond Challenge really helped us. Because when we started our program in Pakistan, we were focused more on agroforestry or new plantations. But during the midway in the process, we realized that the more effective, easier, quicker, and the cheaper way to do it was through assisted natural regeneration. So to use the communities who live in these forests, the indigenous communities, make them the custodians of the forest and let nature regenerate itself. And that was a key to us achieving the target and even surpassing it. So I think this is really important. What is also important is to be flexible when you take up these big targets, and to also look at the whole issue from a different lens. Like Lena very rightly pointed out, you have to make the connections in the right way. If it like in the COVID era, we had to make the connection with green jobs that can be generated for the communities in a COVID safe environment when you talk about forestry and assisted natural regeneration. And that is what created the funds, because the funds were there for the COVID pandemic, but they had to be linked up by looking at forestry, landscape restoration from a different lens. We even announced a protected area initiative during the COVID era, which has increased our national parks in Pakistan by 25%. 25% more national parks have been notified in the COVID era, because we linked it up with the National Park Service, which is creating jobs for the youth, which got unemployed during COVID era. So I think it's all about creating the right lens. And I think that the Bond Challenge provides us a platform for flexibility, for learning, and for taking these issues forward. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you very much, Malik and Salvador. And then I'll just come to a final question with Adriana.
Thank you, Chris. I want to put an example. How was our the measures that we have been taking in this. I think that the way that we can assure that we will take into account the priorities of the communities is because the agencies will implement the plans, the restoration plans that have been prepared by governments. And in that plans, the governments have been assuring that the communities are being participating, no, in the preparation, in the planning, and that's important. The agencies, IUCN, FLR, need to be clear on that. And for example, post-COVID, ministers of CCID asked for some changes to our programs, specifically to a program implemented with the support of the European Union and implemented directly by GIZ, incorporating measures to increase incomes for local people. And now the agencies in this case were very flexible, very open to these adjustments. And that's the kind of examples that I think is important, that all the agencies need to be flexible, need to be open to changes to create more green jobs. And that's clear that if we fail in the post-COVID recovery, the achievements that we are achieved, we are in risk to be lost because of the pressure, as Lina was saying, the pressure that can be put in forests and in all the landscapes will be difficult to overcome. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Salvador, and I fully agree with your response there. And then finally, Adriana, I'd just like to give you the last couple of minutes to also respond to that question, but particularly then how can we track that progress? How can we ensure that kind of restoration is in place and that it's responding to the rural communities, local communities' needs?
Thank you, Chris. Indeed, several initiatives promote specific targets like number of trees planted, or organizations pledge to plant X amount of trees to achieve climate change mitigation goals. This way of setting up targets is useful to visualize the ambition behind the action. However, when taken to the ground, we need to expand our vision from number of trees and think of landscapes. Restoring ecosystems is realized in part through planting and other active measures, but these actions need to be part of strategies to restore and enhance ecosystem integrity and livelihoods. In other words, looking at water availability, soil fertility for food production, conservation and enhancement of habitats, and so on. IUCN will soon launch a science board for the decade, which will formulate foundational concepts about ecosystem restoration to answer to the question, what does quality ecosystem restoration mean? On another hand, another thing that I wanted to highlight is that the decade seeks to succeed through a race to the top. It is essential to track restoration efforts of all scales and types, to offer this information to the world, ignite action over time, and build a credible and comprehensive tracking of implementation progress. If the benefits from restoring ecosystems are tracked and recognized, the sense of feasibility to replicate those positive impacts somewhere else is reinforced. The Decade's consortium organizations are designing a monitoring framework for ecosystem restoration, and existing tools can be deployed for this purpose. IUCN's Restoration Barometer, for instance, can assess the success of the Decade's objectives with aspects such as job generation, finance leveraged, and the quantification of biodiversity, climate, and economic benefits. IUCN's Red List of Ecosystems can be used to evaluate the contribution from restoration to reducing ecosystems risks. This is critical information that can motivate action in support of the decade.
Great, thank you, Adriana, and thank you to all the panelists for all your responses. A lot to take in, and extremely positive. We're talking about the benefits, the synergies, working across sectors, working across landscapes. the think to act, inspire to action. There's a lot of great, wonderful phrases and great thoughts in there. So I thank you all very much. I just earlier, Lena, you were mentioned as the fantastic Lena Poll, and thank you for being the fantastic Lena Poll, but also thank you for being a fantastic panel. So they're all fantastic and all fantastic advocates of not only the Bond Challenge but also the UN Decade of Restoration. So thank you very much, and I look forward to joining you all for the next session in I think in about 30 minutes on the history and the learning from the implementation of the Bond Challenge. So thank you very much.